Another week, another Wildlife Wednesday. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode about lionfish with Savannah Finley. Almost a year ago, when I was visiting Lafayette, Louisiana, not only did I meet her at the National Marines Educators Association, but while there, I took a swamp tour at Lake Martin and happened to meet the wonderfully brilliant Brett Smith, who agreed to sit down with me. In this interview, I speak with Brett not only about him and about Lake Martin, but we discuss a little bit about invasive species as well. Enjoy, and don't forget, no matter how big or small, every species is worth protecting. Go ahead and start by introducing yourself. Let the folks know who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Brett Smith. From Louisiana. We like to call ourselves Louisianimals, all right? But the proper term for us is Cajuns, especially in this area of Louisiana, specifically called Acadiana, right? I work for a swamp guide company, right? And I'm one of the contractors for them, where I take people around the swamp and I teach them about edible plants. I teach them about the culture of the area. I teach them about animal behavior and wildlife behavior that you might see out there. And then I just generally guide people in and out of the woods, or in this case, the swamp. I worked for a place called the Woodlands Conservancy that was based out of New Orleans,
Oh, nice.
and they dealt primarily with forestry. And so all I would do for them was I would take a researcher. In this case, it was a young lady, a very intelligent young lady named Amy. But I would take a researcher and I would bring her in and out of the woods, right? Mm-hmm. In this deep 800-acre, 1,000-acre wood that they had. I picked up a lot of forestry stuff while I was there, but it's not where I'm like specifically educated. Mm-hmm. And then my actual education comes from the myriad of classes that I've taken through the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Classes like wildlife identification, water survival, woodlands navigation, water navigation, and the like. And then I have my bachelor's degree in economics, of all things, with a minor in professional writing.
As an encouragement to you, listening to you speak, listening to your tours, I would love to read something from your perspective in this realm of science, honestly. Because listening to your tour, listening to the culture in relation to wildlife, that's something that I feel you don't see too much when it comes to nature documentaries, nature articles, naturalists. They usually talk about the world of the wild. But what I love about what you do, what you have done, is that you talk about these animals in relation to the human culture that surrounds it. So I encourage you, if it's something that you're interested in, you have at least one person who wants to read what you have to say about it.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. And I agree that animals have, in the wildlife, I've noticed as time has gone on, as human history has gone on, something I noticed not too long ago that was a bit of a revelation in regards to nature. You know, all of our organized religions, a lot of their moments of clarity come from nature. You know, you think about the Abrahamic religions, and where everybody had to go to receive the word of God was always in nature. The Prophet Muhammad had to reach nature. Buddha had to reach nature to get his understanding of nirvana in the world. So I got a great example, right? A lot of people don't know this about the Catholic Church, but we're about to get a saint right here in Acadiana. Acadiana is a specific area of Louisiana, which is a state in the United States of America, right? All the way at the deep, deep south. Okay, we're about as deep as you can go south. And Acadiana is a specific area that the Acadian people that traveled from Canada were expelled there by the British during a big political movement called the Flight of the Acadians, where the British pushed out the French speakers and the French culture because they didn't want anybody allying with France as they worked their political and even militaristic power into that region. Okay, this was the late 1700s. Mm-hmm. So when they expelled them, the only French-speaking place they could go to survive was Louisiana, right? The French colony of Louisiana. And that's why this is a pocket of America where we have the second most spoken language is French. That's Acadiana. So we have possibly a patron saint coming out of Acadiana. They're calling her the little Cajun saint. All right, Charlene Richard.
Love it.
And this was a young girl, right, in the early 1900s who had a rare form of blood cancer. And she was given a very, very terminal diagnosis, and it was not a good one. And so they thought that she would die early. And she was a Catholic,
Mhm.
right? She was a young Catholic girl. In fact, her twin sister is still alive today,
Oh wow.
right? And still lives in Acadiana, still lives in a little town called Muir. But this little girl, Charlene Richard, the Catholics would say that she would pray for everyone but herself, right? And a lot of people saw that she had a gift with not just words, but with her spirituality, if you will. And the only reason I bring this up is because the Catholic Church actually has people that go and assess whether miracles are real. And when I found out about that early on in my life, that they had people whose job it was to go out and see if a miracle was real, I thought, well, wow, what a scientific approach
I agree. Yeah.
to something like religion. And oftentimes, one of these three people who would go out and see if a miracle was real uh, were not a priest. Right? It wasn't a priest. It might have been a psychologist, or it might have been a layman, or it might have been a member of the local community. So to me, I thought that was a very scientific approach. And then it required two miracles to make a saint. Okay, they would have to confirm two miracles.
Interesting.
Now I know this is a lot of rigmarole, but I promise I'm getting to something here.
Okay.
Okay, I promise I'm getting to something here. So after they confirm the miracles, then the person ascends to sainthood. But that got me interested. I said, well, what classifies a miracle?
Mm.
And a miracle is something that cannot be repeated and cannot be explained in a repeatable manner.
Mhm.
Okay, that's kind of the textbook definition of a miracle is something that defies scientific understanding. But yet the Catholic Church approached it scientifically, right? And the reason that I bring that up is because science and religion have always been in tandem, you know, for years. And in Eastern philosophy, which we don't have a lot of in the Western Hemisphere, in Eastern philosophy, that was always the case, right? Their religious understanding was tied to their spiritual, physical understanding of the world, and the two weren't separated. And when I made that connection, okay, it totally blew my mind in regards to religion and nature and how the two intersect, right?
Mhm.
And maybe they don't have to disagree with each other. Maybe instead they augment the understanding of one another.
I love that.
Right.
Especially for a lot of pagan religions, connection with nature. You know, there may have been a deity associated with forces of nature, which I always found fascinating, especially in like Norse, Greek, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Mesopotamian folklore mythology. I always love that, at least in the most earliest, especially like Zionism, if I'm not mistaken, elemental forces and creatures, especially like in Egyptian mythology, has taken shape. And so we try to, as you just illustrated, how nature, wildlife, in its way, is its own religion in a sense. At least it
Mm-hmm.
has just with it over the history of humankind. It's just looked differently to different cultures. Let's talk about Lake Martin for a moment. What about Lake Martin is worth visiting?
So Lake Morton is visited by I don't even know. I wouldn't even be able to garner a guess at how many people come to this specific 740-acre lake all the way out of the way in Louisiana. And it's because it is a perfect form. It is a perfect place to be. The first thing is it has a rookery attached to it. Now, for my people at home, a rookery is a water and wading bird habitat. Okay. Now, from an environmental perspective, a rookery is meant to die within 8 to 10 years. Right? And the reason that is because a rookery is created typically from the silt of a heavy, slow moving river. So a slow moving river will be carrying this silt and this debris, and it will build up on the sides of a bank. Okay. And now that debris and that silt will be just dense enough that plants can take root, and it'll be just dense enough that the birds, the water birds and the wading birds will be able to walk through it with ease. And there's also sometimes maybe enough water for fish to get in and out, spawning areas for fish. And so a rookery, as the silt builds, eventually the silt will become so dense that it becomes land that humans can colonize and live on, which means that the birds will no longer have the place, right? Or at least as far as human history is concerned.
Like humans coming in and taking over the space that was inhabited by these birds. Okay,
Yes, exactly. Humans cannot live on a rookery until it becomes developed enough to where they can walk on
I
it, if
see.
you will. And a rookery in its rawest form has to be an area for wildlife because humanity cannot create structures on it. But because the rookery was created during a very unique time in a very, I'm not going to say tumultuous, but a very changing time for the environment, and that lake, whenever they were building that levee around the lake to close it all in, whenever they were building that levee and closing it all in to fill it up, that rookery no longer gets silt going to it, right? There's no river or bayou going to Lake Martin. So the rookery ended up being stuck in a bubble. Not enough silt gets into the lake to ever make it somewhere that humans can live on, which means that it will always have to be a rookery. It is centrally located in Acadiana. It's only a 20-minute drive from Lafayette, which is an area that people typically go just to enjoy and explore the culture of Louisiana and Acadiana. Third is that it's a public lake and there's no political ties, and there's no, well, you have to pay $15 to get into the parking lot. The entire thing is free and public and managed by a nonprofit group called the Nature Conservancy. So because of that, it's a beautiful area that's easily accessible and is home to over 140 different species of birds. Because that rookery is a bastion in regards to water bird habitats and wading bird habitats in Louisiana. So we've got birds from all over the world that come to Lake Martin to stay.
So with that in mind, aside from the usual animals that you can expect in Lake Martin, just swamps of Louisiana, such as alligators, a number of shorebirds, and a number of swamp birds and insects, what would you say is one of the greatest, let's say, animal attractions that people should expect if they visit?
Alligators. I mean, everybody comes here to see an alligator. I make a joke at the beginning when I take people on the boat, and I tell them, I say, about 1 in 200 people come with me to see the plants,
Uh,
and 1 in every 50 people come with me to see the birds,
right.
and they have my heart. One out of every one comes to see an alligator.
That's true.
Even the people who live in Louisiana come out to see an alligator because it's a dinosaur, 300 million years old. The species in its form now was 300 million years ago in its first evolution.
Hey listeners, just want to pop in and say that if you're enjoying the interview and you want to see more words on wildlife, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what do you want to see next.
I think that everybody comes to see an alligator, and that's something you can expect out of the lake. It's got 7,000 alligators in it at last record. So you can throw a rock and you'll end up encountering an alligator there. So that the animals are very used to humans. They're very accustomed to humans. And so because of that, they're very trusting of them.
Uh-huh.
So it's a very magical place to experience, even if you don't go on a tour, even if you just go sit on the dock It's a very magical place.
Well, it's going back to alligators. Because you made a really good point about how they're very long lived and really well at surviving for millions of years, compared to a lot of other animals who have had to adapt and change every, great extinction. In your experience and how
Mhm.
you understand the species, why is the alligator and animals like crocodiles and caiman, why are they so successful as what they were some however million years ago to today? Why is it that they haven't changed as much?
That's a good question. So I think we can see this with a lot of our other very old species. Okay, so what I like to do whenever I'm thinking of things from an environmental science standpoint, once you're out there, all of this stuff uniquely works together,
Mm.
right? All of this, even with the invasive species, even when the invasive species come in, they find their own niche, right? And so even if they destroy everything else, some could consider that nature. Right? If you left two deer in the woods without any human intervention in 100-acre wood, they would destroy that wood, right? In no time at all. You give them 30 years, 20 years, they would absolutely decimate that forest, right? So everything works in tandem. And you look at some of our oldest species. What are some of the other species that have survived equivalent amounts of time on a geological scale?
The first one comes
The
to,
alligator snapping.
or
Oh
as
yeah, you think of,
I think of sharks, but you were going to say the alligator snapping turtle.
right? Okay, so we could use sharks as a great example as well. But the first thing that comes to mind is a very common theme is that they are typically the top of their food chain. And so an alligator is the apex predator here. It's been the apex predator here for some amount of time. The great white shark has been an apex predator for a very, very long time. Let's look at the alligator snapping turtle. Has been I was using a swamp based reference, but an alligator snapping turtle has been around for quite some time, and he's definitely considered a top predator. So I think that's something. And then second is their relationship with food and nutrition. And this is something I touched on a little bit in the tour. But alligators can go over a year without eating anything at all. And alligator snapping turtles have a very similar biological equivalent of being able to go into a form of hibernation. Sharks are specifically designed to consistently eat and to be one of the best at it. And sharks are in the most abundant food source in the world, right? The ocean.
Mm.
And so I think that all of those species that have survived for a very long period of time has come down to whether they can go without food or whether they have plentiful access to it. And you can see that within the ice age. You could see that within the solar flares that have burned the surface of the earth. You can see that with all of those. If you can hide or if you had access to food consistently, then your species typically survived. And we see that with a lot of large animals, right? The crocodile being a bit of an exception, but the alligator snapping turtle is a big animal, but it's not a huge animal. The great white shark is a big animal. It's not a huge animal. A huge animal would be like a whale. You
Right.
know, a whale is a huge animal. There's a reason there's not many of those that exist. I think it all comes down to nutrition.
That's awesome. Let's talk about invasive species, because I feel one thing that if when listeners listen to this, I want them to understand the importance of regulating invasive species, but also the nuance of it. Because oftentimes when we hear invasive, we sometimes think this is awful for the environment. One of the exceptions that I have learned about are honeybees, that, they come from Europe, but even though they're invasive to North America, in the scientific community, we actually seem to find them really important for biodiversity. So, in your line of work and in your ecosystem that you see, are there invasive species that one, people should know about and be aware of? And two, are there any nuances to any of these species that we should see them in a different light?
I have a perfect example for that. The best example I can give is the nutria. Okay, so the nutria is a small water mammal that lives or that came from South America. And there's a whole story of how it came here, but it came from South America in the early 1900s. And whenever it came here, we realized that they bred faster than a lot and more easily than a lot of our natural water mammals that we had here, like the river otter, like the beaver. Those are water mammals that we had natively here. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and a lot of this part of the South knew that nutria were an invasive and bad species. They like to eat the roots of plants, and that's something that obviously is very problematic for a place like Louisiana that's covered in 70% water and has a lot of water-based plants, right? It's not like the nutria are coming out onto our yards. They're eating the plants that are in the water themselves. And so we knew it was a problem from early on. So Louisiana developed a way to attack them, and that was they offered very early on in Louisiana history, they offered $5 a tail for every nutria tail you brought in. Okay, and you could bring them in anywhere. You could bring them into a police station, even, right? As long as you could show, well, I killed a nutria, then the Louisiana state government would pay you $5 a tail. Okay, now that bounty still exists today.
Mm.
And you can still bring nutria tails in today. But interestingly enough, there's a season for nutria. If you kill nutria outside of the season, you'll get fined. But this is an invasive, exactly. This is an invasive species that we know we need to get rid of, and we know is bad for our environment. Yet there's a season for them, but there's also a bounty for them if you kill them. So what does the state want? A season seems like they're protecting it, but a bounty seems like they want to get rid of it, right? At all, by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because the nutria, as they came into Louisiana, and this will round us out and help us talk about alligators as well.
Sure.
As they came into Louisiana, they filled a specific ecological niche, which was a water-based mammal, right? Like a river otter or a beaver, which a river otter and a beaver are all prey to an alligator. So whenever we started killing them, the way the populations were lined up is that the nutriats started taking over, and we had a very low population of otters and beavers and other water-based mammals. But then we killed so many nutria that the alligators had nothing to eat. So they started to eat the very small population of otters and beavers. So the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries was like, whoa, we can kill them, and we know we need to get rid of them, but we can't get rid of them all at once. They've been here for too long. They've established themselves within our ecology for too long, that now if we were to drastically change it, then all that would be left, since we're not killing otters and we're not killing beavers, but alligators don't care. Alligators don't care if it's illegal.
Yeah.
They don't care if it's illegal to kill otters and beavers. And that it's like we very, very specifically hold on to our beaver pelts and our otter pelts and our furs in America. It's a whole thing that I implore you to talk to somebody who's smarter than me about it. When it comes to fur trading and trapping in America, it's a very unique part of our economy. But with all that being said, that is one of those nuances. Nutriats, everybody wants to get rid of them, but they know if they get rid of them too quickly and too drastically, that the otters and beavers that remain will get eaten by our apex predators. And so because of that, we're still trying to find a balance between how we approach nutria.
I absolutely love that you shared that, because I think that's definitely going to add a layer of complexity that people need to consider when we try to find solutions for this. How can people better support your work, and what's a good way for people to reach out if they're interested in learning more about you?
Sure. So my name is Brett Smith. You can find me on Facebook. If you just want to connect with me, I'm a bit of an old school man here. So you could actually just text me, call me at 337-308-9911. If you want to come out, I'll take you out across the swamps. I'll teach you about more things than we went over in this interview, like edible plants, how to survive out there, woodlands navigation, what Louisiana has lived off of and what Louisiana has lost, if you will. So And then the company, if you want to go directly to the company or company website, is Cajun Country Swamp Tours. CajunCountrySwampTours.com, Cajun Country Swamp Tours on Instagram and Facebook. And if you want to go through them, you'll end up talking to me anyways.
Fantastic. I want to emphasize how great you are at what you do. And I
Thank
hope
you.
creating a platform like this, me doing this kind of work, I hope that I can help highlight lesser known professionals in this field. Because the more I'm involved in it, the more I realize how important conversations like this need to be happening in the public. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. Tell your wife, even though I don't know if you've spoken to her about me, tell her I said hello from San Diego.
Well, that'll wrap up yet another episode of Words on Wildlife. Can you believe it? We're already over 50 subscribers. I have so much more planned, don't you worry. Be sure to check in with me every Wildlife Wednesday for more Words on Wildlife. And if you are someone who is a scientist, maybe even a wildlife enthusiast, and you want to speak with me about your passions in wildlife, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you want to see in the future here on this channel, where we can have more Words on Wildlife.